All right. Welcome, everybody, for the fourth American University in Moscow Rising Tide Foundation roundtable on a peace dialogue. And, Ed couldn't make it today. He wanted to apologize. He had to speak at a conference. Um, but that's okay. He's here in spirit. And what we wanted to do when we set out with these bi-weekly or bi-monthly, I don't even know what that word means. Is it every 2 weeks? Every 2 week sessions is to really introduce context, historical, global context with a look towards the future and problem solving in regards to the global existential crisis we as a society are facing. So their context is often lacking in a lot of the talking heads when you turn on TV or you look at your typical podcast and you get expert analysis. There's often like a tendency to go too myopic and break down details like a football game and ignore a lot of reality. So we wanted to find speakers who generally don't do that. And whether or not people agree on details, the idea is every single week we are always bringing in guests who have proven themselves, have demonstrated that they have this instinct towards looking at deep history, at the context, and really with a sense of avoiding war and imperialism in any way possible. So today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going into the elections. It's going to be extremely important. It's a major battleground, obviously for humanity right now. What happens in the U.S. impacts everybody on Earth. So a lot of eyeballs are there. And again, context, the economic crisis that we've been going into for a number of years, that's going into a new wave of breakdown. There's a lot of potential for a new system to emerge. What that could look like is yet to be seen. And we have a fight in the US. So I'm not American. I'm watching this thing and trying to make sense of it. And the five or maybe six speakers that we're going to have today have are all very in tune. And even though, like I said, we're going to find some disagreements on certain things, everyone's very in tune and very committed to not being responsible for mass murder as some people are. So we want to avoid that. So we have Peter Kuznick, Garland Nixon, Alex Krainer, Tom Luongo, VJ Vargas, and possibly Joaquin Flores will be here with us today as main speakers. And like usual, well, this is going to be different. Each speaker will take maybe 5 to maximum 10 minutes to just share their formal assessment of the U.S. elections. And then we're going to go into open dialogue with the audience and with each speaker, possibly. The other thing that I want to just say, every speaker's personal websites where they either write, share their thoughts in podcast form will be made available in the description box too. But without further ado, let's open it up for the two men who I know cannot be here for the whole duration of today's roundtable. Garland Nixon, and we'll have then Peter Kuznick, Tom, Alex, and so on and so forth. So Garland, are you still there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Go for it.
Great. All right. Here's something I'd like to talk about. I think it's important to talk about the dynamics of the vote here in the U.S. And there seems to be some historical changes. Of course, parties are made up of various groups that have things in common. And in this particular instance, what has come to my attention, a lot of it anecdotally, is changes in the Black vote in the United States. I think that's important. For one reason is that the U.S. needs an anti-war movement, and that there are various people, various groups that have been made up the anti-war movement over history. But Black people have been a very strong part of the anti-war movement, and the discussion in the Black community has been, well, if there's a war, we always go to the front lines, blah blah blah. And I think that the Obama administration was able to, wash the anti-war movement out of the Black community to some extent. One of the many terrible things I think that the Obama people was able to do, and drag, as they dragged the party to the right and be more pro-war. I think that one of the reasons that we're seeing a different dynamic, that I'm hearing things that I've never heard in the Black community now about, I'm going to vote for Trump. Now, this is not Trump is good, bad, or who's good or bad. It's that the dynamics are changing. I'm going to vote for Trump. I've had it with the Democrats, or I'm going to stay home, is because While outside of the Black community, a lot of people see the Black voting bloc through the lens of race, their Black voting bloc. Within the Black community is really an economic bloc. They see economics first, right? So and cultural. A lot of the Black community, particularly the older Black community voting, are culturally conservative. A lot of them go to church, things of that nature. So a lot of the woke stuff, you know what I mean? I'm not going to say good, bad, or indifferent. It doesn't go over all of that great within the older Black community. So they're like, oh, we don't want to fool with the LGBTQ community, but there's still the issue of, but we don't want to be talking about that stuff all the time. Those are the kind of things anecdotally that I hear does not align with the Democratic Party. So the cultural alignment with the Democratic Party is on shaky ground, shall we say. Additionally, the Black community and the voting community sees themselves through an economic perspective. Hey, like everybody else, let's face it, I got kids to feed. How much does it cost to buy eggs? How much does it cost to put a roof over my head, et cetera, et cetera? And ultimately, while a lot of people outside the Black community doesn't understand that, those are the principal drivers. And so now they're looking at it saying, well, we kind of thought that the Democrats were going to give us a little bit of a shot. But now, and I hear this from people, yeah, I don't really like Trump, but when he was in office, things were cheaper. So I'm either going to vote Trump or I'm not going to vote. Things I never heard before in the Democratic Party. Practical reasons for voting. Again, I'm not in any way saying that taking a position here, oh, it'll be better or worse under Trump. That's not the issue that I'm discussing. It's why does there seem to be a realignment? Political realignment. Let's not forget, over the course of history, we can go back to the 1850s and 60s with the Whigs and the Know Nothings and all coming together in political realignments. We can go through numerous realignments in political realignments through U.S. history. And I think that what we're seeing right now is a political realignment where simply there's still, yes, amongst the older traditional Black community, I think there's still a lot of people who, let's face it, in all the communities, white, Black, green, gray, or grizzly, who see politics, unfortunately, as a team. I'm on the blue team or I'm on the red team. If my team wins, or my team loses, blah, blah, blah. Is there still that element there? Certainly, there's still that element all over the U.S. But I think particularly amongst younger people and even up to the people in middle age, there's much more of a discussion about, I don't care who's president, I'm just trying to eat. You know what I mean? I'm just trying to put a roof over my head. And that is creating a dynamic. I think there's certainly the issue of Gaza is part of the discussion. I'll put it like this. The younger you get into the Black community, the more there's a discussion of foreign policy, because those are the people who would go to war. It's existential to them. Hey, we're concerned about that. And they're online all the time. They don't watch the news, MSNBC, CNN. Those people are 65 and older, right? The younger people are online watching this kind of stuff. They're watching things online. So I think that what we're seeing now is not just a temporary shift in voting, wherein the likelihood we see his numbers, he's already had historic numbers in Black voters, right? In 2016, 8%. I think Obama got 98%. Democrats particularly get 96, 97%. So when they're down to 90 or in the 80 some percent range, these are historic changes and shifts. And now what we're seeing now is a trend line where every 4 years it gets a little further and further. And I think it's going to be a massive trend. There's going to be a massive change now mainly because of economic pain. But also, I don't think this is, okay, so Trump's running, a bunch of Black people Black males are going to vote for him. It's got to be males or females or blah, blah, blah. I don't think the dynamics are as much about identity or gender or race as it is simply that most Black people in America fall into the working class, the working poor, or the poor, mostly working class. The numbers are high, working class and working poor. So people who, and the working poor are the hardest working people. These are people that work on the roads, they work at the sewage plant, they work wherever it is. The working poor work places where they work really, really, really hard. And they are really pissed when they bust their ass for 40 hours and that 40 hours worth of money ain't getting the job done. They're going to be the angriest people that you can possibly find, the hardest working people. You work on a friggin' roof with tar in 100 degrees and you get the check and that ain't getting it done, you're going to be angrier than the guy that works in an air conditioned building and maybe it doesn't quite get it done. And I think that in the interest of peace, which is a big part of this discussion, that there people can view the shift, the political shift, as an opportunity to also make that a shift in, or see that as an opportunity to utilize that to rebuild an anti-war community, to see those same people who are saying, we're leaving the Democratic Party, not because it's Democratic or not, because we're looking over there, we're seeing Dick Cheney, for God's sake, hey, that ain't working for us. And because we look over there and everything they talk about, and we hear, I hear this stuff. Hey, they got money there. For God's sake, it's going to Israel. It's going to Taiwan. They're giving all of this money for illegal immigrants, right or wrongly. That's what I hear. And there's some truth to that. I mean, we see the hotels and they're putting immigrants in there and they're giving them stuff. I'm not taking an anti-immigrant position. I'm just simply saying from the view and perspective of a lot of people in the Black community, I don't want to use, and this is important to understand, I don't want to use the word jealousy. Not, I'm angry because the immigrants are getting something that I'm not. What I want to hear, what I really hear is, it's not fair. I'm being overlooked and I'm paying taxes and this is my government. So I think that the disgust right now in a lot of people in the Black community will bear itself out in the vote. And I think those of us who are pushing for peace should look at that as an opportunity to say this voting bloc that was traditionally anti-war, that the Obama coalition washed that out of them. And now they're trying to drag them in even further into supporting the Cheney people and the Boltons, that the fact that they are divorcing themselves from these people is an opportunity to see them as a very good and strong alliance, anti-war alliance, and to try to rebuild a stronger and more fundamentally sound anti-war movement in the United States than, say, the one of the 70s, because they painted that as just a bunch of dope smoking hippies running around. That was really painted as, a bunch of incoherent clowns. Well, that wasn't true, but I do think that in building an anti-war coalition now, that we should look at the Black voters who are leaving the Democratic Party, who are voting third party, voting for Trump, doing all kinds of things that people thought they'd never do before, see them as a powerful ally in an anti-war coalition that can be used to, save, that can be used to save humanity. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Garland. Thank you very much. And I love the fact that you're bringing the point to the population. The only way you can actually have a viable republic or any sovereign country is if you have a participating active citizenry that is taking responsibility. And I saw Paul Robeson's works behind you there. And that's definitely something that we lack in a lot of these discussions is what's our personal responsibility? Are we creating an actual citizens movement that's doing something that's potent, not just, tying myself to a tree or something or lighting something on fire, but really potent from that standpoint. So thank you for that. I know that Peter mentioned that he may not be able to be on for this entire program. So Peter, there's something weird going on as a background sound. Don't know what that is. All right, hold on. Okay, Peter. Peter's been a longtime friend of Ed Lozansky. He's a professor of the American University. He is the director of the Nuclear Studies Institute. He's written a ton of books on avoiding war. He's worked with Oliver Stone as well on a film series, The Untold History of the United States. So very curious to get Peter's remarks as well. Being an American, sitting in the thick of it. What's your take on things, Peter?
Well, Matt, thank you. But let me first say that I'm not able to be brief. So what I've done and at least one of my students is on this, and she can attest to it. What I've done is I've written up my remarks, and I've got them up here. I'm going to read them so I can go a lot faster and try to get it in 10 minutes.
Okay.
But please bear with me. I'm sorry for that. I don't like reading papers. But let me say, I'm not a fan of Kamala Harris. I deplore her warmongering and her celebration of American lethality. I condemn her blind support for Ukraine and NATO. I'm appalled by her refusal to cut weapons off to Israel while it's committing genocide in Gaza and spreading war throughout the region. If and when she's elected next week, I'll be protesting her foreign policies every chance I get. I've already committed to 9 TV and 1 print interview next week in India and Russia, in which I'll be calling for a change in U.S. global policy. But she's not a fascist, and she will not end the little bit of democracy that we have in this country. To me, Donald Trump exudes odiousness out of every pore in his body. He represents everything I despise in U.S. politics. He's racist, immigrant-hating and scapegoating, misogynist, fear-mongering, divisive, mendacious, ignorant, hyper-nationalist, and narcissistic. I agree with those who call him a fascist, and I agree with General Milley when he told Bob Woodward, no one has ever been as dangerous in this country as Donald Trump. Now I realize he's a total fascist. He's the most dangerous person to this country. While Trump may be more likely to force a settlement of the Ukraine war on Zelensky, he is much more dangerous when it comes to Iran and China. He almost went to war with Iran during his presidency. He's a blind supporter of Israel, criticizing Harris for being too weak in her support for Netanyahu and urging Netanyahu to strike Iran's nuclear facilities. He's far more hawkish toward China and largely provoked the renewed tensions between China and Taiwan with his increasing arms sales and heightened diplomatic relations to Taiwan. So he may ease one of the world's 3 principal hotspots, but he would inflame the other 2. I don't have time to get into all of this now, so I've decided to focus on Donald Trump's nuclear policies. Shortly after John Kennedy's assassination, Jackie Kennedy wrote to Nikita Khrushchev in November 1963, saying that he and her husband, quote, were allied in a determination that the world should not be blown up. The danger which troubled my husband was that war might be started not so much by the big men as by the little ones. While big men know the need for self-control and restraint, little men are sometimes moved more by fear and pride. Donald Trump is just such a little man and should never again be in control of America's nuclear arsenal. We were lucky to survive his first presidency and cannot risk that our luck will endure through a second one. If there's any position that requires rational judgment, sober circumspection, wisdom, knowledge, restraint, understanding adversaries, careful deliberation, and empathy, it's the presidency of the United States, a position that makes its occupant one of the 2 people in the world who have veto power over the future existence of life on this planet. Donald Trump may be the most egregiously unfit person to have that responsibility, but that's a power that no one should have. It's madness that almost 80 years after the atomic destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we still have more than 12,000 nuclear bombs in the world. I was very glad that my nominee, Niho Hidankyo, won the Nobel Peace Prize, and I'm looking forward to going to Oslo as part of their delegation. But it's madness today that the world is again on the brink of nuclear war. It's madness that no one stands between the President of the United States and authorization to launch America's nuclear arsenal. It's madness that, according to an August 20th New York Times article by David Sanger, U.S. policy now envisions fighting and winning a simultaneous 3-front nuclear war against Russia, China, and North Korea. It's madness that, according to an August 20th Bulletin of Atomic Scientists and other more reliable sources, there are nuclear strategists who believe that the U.S. can launch a preemptive nuclear attack against its adversaries to which they would be unable to retaliate. And it would be absolute madness to ever let Donald Trump regain access to those nuclear codes. While nobody should ever have the power to end life on our planet, be it Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Vladimir Putin, or Xi Jinping, that threat would be exponentially more dangerous with that power in the hands of Donald Trump, a shallow, rash, impulsive, misanthropic, pathological narcissist. As even Hillary Clinton said during the 2016 campaign, a man who could be provoked by a tweet should not be anywhere near the nuclear codes. Trump revealed his unfitness even before assuming the presidency in 2017. He asked, what was the point of having nuclear weapons if we couldn't use them? He was right. Most people would take the next step and say we should then get rid of them, but not Trump. Trump concluded we had to make them more usable, which he proceeded to do. One frightening, though revealing moment came in Evansville, Indiana, when former basketball coach and Indiana icon Bobby Knight, in endorsing Trump, said, we got to talk about this presidential crap just for a minute here. I'll tell you who they said wasn't presidential, and that guy, Harry Truman. And Harry Truman, with what he did in dropping and having the guts to drop the bomb in 1944, well, a year off, saved millions of American lives. And that's what Harry Truman did. He became one of the three great presidents of the United States. And here's a man who did the same thing, because he's going to become one of the four great presidents of the United States. And Trump stood next to Knight, smiling and nodding in agreement. Such a great guy. Wow. How do you type that? You should be very proud of him in Indiana. This is a national treasure, okay? During his presidency, Trump has advisors who restrained him, at least until he fired them. We won't be so lucky the next time. Among them was Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. When Trump bemoaned the decline in the U.S. nuclear arsenal and called for a tenfold increase during the July 20th meeting, Tillerson called him a fucking moron. In February 2017, in Trump's first phone call with Putin, Putin proposed extending the New START treaty beyond its 2021 expiration date. Trump paused the conversation to ask his aides what the treaty was. Once informed, he strongly criticized it and rejected its extension. He complained to Reuters, it's a one-sided deal like the other deals we make. It gave them things we should never have allowed. Our country only made bad deals. We don't make good deals. By a vote of 71 to 26, the Senate had approved this bad one-sided treaty, which had the unanimous support of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and was endorsed by 7 four-star admirals and generals who had controlled all U.S. nuclear strategic forces. He not only failed to renew the New START treaty, he abrogated the Open Skies Treaty and the INF Treaty, which U.S. Ambassador to Russia John Huntsman said was, quote, probably the most successful treaty in the history of arms control. Trump also reviled the JCPOA, the 2015 Iran nuclear deal that Iran had negotiated with the U.S., Russia, China, Germany, Britain, and France. As a result of the deal, Iran had mothballed most of its centrifuges, disabled its plutonium-producing heavy water reactor at Arak, shipped 98% of its centrifuges, shipped 98% of its enriched uranium out of the country, capped uranium enrichment levels at 3.67%, far below the 90% needed for weapons grade, and allowed regular inspections by the IAEA, whose director said the Iranians were fully complying with the deal, which guaranteed that Iran would be at least a year away from getting a bomb. But the JCPOA had been Obama's signature foreign policy achievement, ferociously opposed by Netanyahu, who came to the U.S. to lobby against it, and by AIPAC and majority Republicans. During the campaign, Trump said, my number one priority is to dismantle the disastrous deal with Iran. As president, he surrounded himself with anti-Iran hardliners and denigrated the deal as, quote, one of the worst and most one-sided transactions the U.S. has ever entered into. In March 2018, Trump announced that the U.S. was withdrawing from the horrible one-sided deal.
Hey, Peter, are you almost at your 10-minute mark? Or
I'm almost there. The Saudis and Israelis applauded. The Europeans were livid. Tension with Iran ratcheted up. And today, as a result of Trump's stupidity, Iran has restarted its centrifuges, enriched a much larger supply of uranium, not to 3.7%, but to 60%, as is within a month of developing a nuclear bomb. Then I was going to talk about his relationship with Kim Jong-un, the 28-year-old whack job, a maniac, a rocket man, and how close we came to war with North Korea. I was going to talk about Trump's nuclear posture review in 2018, which lowered the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons, developed new weapons. And it was written by Keith Payne, who had formerly said that in 1980, he wrote an article in Foreign Policy insisting the U.S. could win a nuclear war against the Soviet Union, and with adequate command and control, we could keep U.S. losses down to a survivable 20 million people. That's who Trump put in charge of the nuclear posture review. I would talk about a lot of other things that Trump said and did, but what I'm saying is that given the current state of affairs, we might not survive a Biden or Harris presidency, but a second Trump presidency would be too dangerous to even contemplate. And I'd be happy to talk about all of these issues in much more detail.
Okay, thank you for sharing that, Peter. So that was that's a word from Peter on the situation in the world. Okay, so there's a number of other speakers here. I was thinking Tom might be worth a bit of counterpoint here. Tom, would you like to chime in?
Sure. Peter's position on Trump is interesting. I don't share it at all. I find negotiation tactics and results are the things that matter. We know how Trump operates. Your personal opinion about him personally as a boorish and or uncultured person is that's interesting, but Trump is America first, which is fine, and there's nothing wrong with that. In the context of foreign policy, you don't negotiate from positions of weakness, like it or not. It's unnerving, it's upsetting, it's all of those things. I've never been a fan. I was not much of a fan of the JCPOA for a variety of reasons, because there's a larger context in which it actually operates. And Alex Krainer and I have talked about this a great deal, and that the JCPOA was nothing more than it was a means by which for continental Europe to get access to Iranian oil and blow up the Middle East. And yes, Trump's support of Israel is not something I'm a big fan of. But at the same time, there were no actual conflicts. We moved up to the point of conflict, and we used sanctions, which are certainly not anything that I endorse in any way, manner, shape, or form. But given the imbalance within trade relations and everything else, and given that we know that the Biden and Harris administration don't work for the United States, they work for transnational oligarchs that are centered in Brussels, attempting to overlay a transnational security state and surveillance state. No, I don't agree with Peter's assessment of Trump at all. We're not going to serve. The goal of this election is to destroy the United States from both sides. No matter who wins, someone is going to not accept the election. Okay. And the histrionics that are surrounding Trump's return to power, while again, I don't consider Trump perfect in any way, manner, shape, or form, the people he has around him are not warmongers. This time, during his first administration, the people that were put around him were effectively handed to him out of a lack of ability to get anybody to come and work for him. The GOP was constantly undermining him at every turn. And at the end of the day, he negotiates hard, but he doesn't negotiate. But at the end of the day, he didn't actually cross any lines. Like Trump went to North Korea. This is something that's unbelievable that he went to North Korea. We forget this. and we're trying to turn that around in some way that we shouldn't speak to our enemies. Okay. Iran and the forking on Iran was about as much taking Davos and the European impulse towards recolonizing all of Central Asia and continuing to rape Africa as was anything else. And this is the real threat that we face today. And I don't want another 4 years of a faceless, kept puppet in the White House doing the bidding of different foreign nationals. You might not like Trump's stance on China, but at the end of the day, Trump will negotiate a deal with China. Okay. In the world of geopolitics, you have to threaten X in order to get Y. That's reality. And if we don't want to hear that and we don't want to deal with that, we don't want to get our hands dirty on that, well, then we're not serious commentators. That's the way I see that. So we all want peace, but how are we going to get there? So when we know that we have a group of people that are literally like inviting the world through the border, and which they've done to Europe and they've done to Britain and they've done to the United States now, when they're undermining our election cycles in every way, manner, shape, and form to push forward a monetary system that is 100% surveillance guaranteed. And, so I'm not trading nuclear war for a 100% surveillance state. Okay. I don't believe that that's even a real dichotomy. I think that's histrionic bullshit, if you want my honest opinion. It's actually quite offensive to actually listen to that. Because if you can't see the clear and stark differences between what these two groups of people represent, not Trump, the people around Trump, what Garland was talking about, that's what's happening here. We're seeing the complete betrayal of Keir Starmer of the entire British middle class. We're seeing Olaf Scholz in Germany having destroyed the German middle class. Get the picture, folks? That's the thing I'm worried about. Is Kamala Harris a fascist? No, she's a communist. And I'm over it. And I'm over like making any excuses for the idea that we should entertain these people. They're not serious. They're children, and they're the grandchildren of the wealth of old colonial Europe that feels entitled to continue running the world. Alex and I are pretty famous for saying all roads lead to London. Well, yeah, and London and Brussels are fighting. They're fighting over the control of Israel, which is Britain's land-based aircraft carrier. None of this is in any way, manner, shape, or form acceptable, but it's the reality we have to deal with. And how do you unwind all that? Well, you unwind all that by re-regionalizing the global economy, by allowing the United States to walk away from being the monetary hegemon of the world, which clearly the Federal Reserve is trying to do with 5.5% interest rates. And what the BRICS are doing in response to the weaponization of the dollar by trying to form an economic and security alliance across decentralized Asia, which has been British foreign policy to prevent that for over 200 years. Like, this is the fight we're dealing with here. And Trump, in many ways, now kind of represents a lot of that. He represents that. He represents the people that are around him. Like we have Tulsi Gabbard is out there literally telling everybody we're closer to nuclear war than we've ever been ever before. And now you lay at Biden's feet, because Biden is the one that started Ukraine. Biden's the one that's been pushing. Obama pushed Ukraine. That's all friggin' Victoria Nuland and John McCain and everything else. Like, to lay that at Trump's feet is offensive. So, yeah, no, this is a pretty clear choice here on Tuesday. And as far as I'm concerned, what I see on Tuesday is that Tuesday is the beginning of the of this process. Because what happens on November 6th is actually more important than what happens on November 5th. Because if the polls are correct and Trump is going to win, which he should win, because he can draw 100,000 people into a freaking rally and she can't get 200 people to actually show up at a freaking basketball game, high school basketball game. The same shit that we saw in 2020 with Biden, but it's different. Garland laid out the dynamics. People are seeing through the nonsense. And all Trump has to do here is manage it, is manage the shift. and we'll walk away from that. But we have to separate ourselves from these feckless European communists that are literally trying to destroy and enslave the world, and use the United States as the bully to get that done, which is what they've been doing. Britain and Europe picked a fight in Ukraine that they couldn't finish. They continued to try and finish that fight, and the United States, and even our Defense Department is like, "Okay, we're not doing that." As nobody noticed what's going on. We have tripwire troops in Israel. We have Russian tripwire troops in Iran. There ain't going to be no friggin' major exchange of weapons or weapons fire of any significance between Israel and Iran. That's already been defused. Why? Because, as I said 3 years ago, the O5s and the O6s in the American military are like, no, we can't fight this war, even if the generals want it. The generals are all political. To quote friggin' our generals, who were, all of our decent military men were thrown out. We only had political yes men that were put in place under Obama. Like, it's insane. Like, what are we talking about here? These people want a war in Ukraine and or with Iran because they need to reset the global economic system, and they need a war to cover the default. That's what's going on. When what we really are starting to see is the world break up into economic blocks, as it should. And yeah, there's going to be some tariffs go up, and there's going to be some sanctions, and there's going to be all that. That's all transitional state stuff. None of that is permanent. That's a negotiating tactic to get to the other side, where you fight an economic war. So you're not lobbing nuclear missiles at each other. And yet somehow it's okay that, the British want to give the Ukrainians Tomahawks and Storm Shadows to attack St. Petersburg. And you're going to lay that at fucking Trump's feet? Like, what else do I have to say? That's enough.
Thank you, Tom, for the counterpoint. That's what I really like is counterpoint, is not just everybody always agreeing to the same worldview, but really getting across a threshing of ideas and then working through it. So very, very important to also bring in the economic aspect of things, which also sets the stage for Alex, who's another incredible economic analyst and geostrategic analyst who's been at this for a long time. And I'm curious to see, Alex, what's your take?
Thank you, Matthew. I'd prefer to be thought of as a credible analyst rather than an incredible one, but okay, I'm glad I'm invited to begin with. So anyway, yes, I have to say that my thinking is much, much closer to Tom's. And I think that it is very important that we try to look at this problem matter through the prism of the broadest possible context in which the current conflicts should be regarded. And it's not mysterious, they tell us this themselves. So George Soros said this. Many officials from the United States Department of Defense, State Department, NATO, and so forth regurgitated essentially the very same point. And that is that what we're seeing in the world today is the clash between two systems of governance. And then they dress it up as a clash between democracies and autocracies. But we know that what they dress up in the fancy packaging of democracy are actually oligarchic systems in the West. We are under an occult oligarchy, which is responsible for most of the world wars most of the global wars since World War II. And they are opposed not only to what they call autocracies, people like Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, the Iranian mullahs, and all of these denigrating labels that they put on things. They're opposed to everyone, to the whole of humanity. And evidently, the democratic system of the United States, which we, have to pretend that we cherish and defend, is responsible for more than 80% of all wars fought between 1946 and today. 80% of them. So, to now reduce it down to personalities and to pretend to not understand otherwise, and then to dress up these personalities even to the point of quoting people like Hillary Clinton and Rex Tillerson, I think is a little bit, how do you call it, déplacé. I find it glib and shallow and disappointing. The the conflict is between all of us and the oligarchic system of governance, which is going to end up destroying us completely in the same way that it destroyed the British Empire, the French Empire, the Belgian Empire, the Spanish Empire, the Roman Empire, because it's a parasite that, if unrestrained, depletes and devastates the hosts. It has a completely consistent track record through more than 2,000 years of history. So we're not talking about personalities. And because Donald Trump is nasty, then we can, defer to Hillary Clinton and say, like, well, Kamala Harris is slightly less nastier, so maybe we'll be safer if we go with Kamala Harris. It's a particularly disappointing piece of analysis. And I would just end this by pointing to a possible solution, because what we're talking about is unrestrained rule of oligarchies, which we've had since Greek antiquity and which has always produced the same result. It's not about personalities, it's about the oligarchy, and it's about the system of governance that they, foment, which invariably through history has led to misery and mayhem at home, permanent warfare abroad, and always leads to complete destruction. We had 10 years of this in Russia under the rule of the 7 bankers. We're always talking about money lending oligarchies. It's always the bankers. So this is who should be in our crosshairs, not Trump because he's a stupid fucking ignorant dick or whatever we want to call him, to disqualify him because Rex Tillerson said something like that. We should be focused on who is in the pockets of the oligarchy. And I think it's clear as day. It's Kamala Harris, it's the DNC, it's the Bidens, the Clintons, the Rex Tillersons, and so forth. That's who's in the pockets of the occult oligarchies, who are on the axis of New York, Wall Street, and City of London. So that's who we are opposed to, whether we like Donald Trump or whether we dislike him. People may have noticed that people like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. switched sides to join Donald Trump. And we might wonder why. Because he's a fucking loser? We might have noticed that Tulsi Gabbard switched sides and joined Donald Trump. Is she also an ignorant nobody and a worthless person without integrity? And lastly, I would also suggest to Peter to proofread his own remarks, because in the beginning he said that if Donald Trump didn't land us in an additional war, it's because he was surrounded by advisors who restrained him until he fired them. And then later he also said that he surrounded himself with pro-Iran war hawks. So it's one or the other. It can't be both. Now, one thing we know about the war with Iran, which Peter said Trump almost started means he didn't start it. Isn't that correct? The power that was trying to lobby and coerce Trump into launching the war on Iran was the British embassy. You'll remember there was a leak of document in 2019 by Anonymous, which revealed that the British ambassador in Washington, Sir Kim Derrick, was the ringleader trying to bring Trump to launch an attack on Iran. Trump declined. Sir Kim Derrick went ballistic and fired off a series of very undiplomatic cables to London, which were then leaked, causing such a scandal that London had to recall Kim Derrick, Sir Kim Derrick, right, and replace him with a different ambassador. So maybe, we should be a little bit more discerning than sounding like high school kids looking at who's most popular and who's cool and who's not cool, and trace the trail of breadcrumbs to the centers of powers that are actually trying to bring this world to the verge of nuclear annihilation. And if we just, go with personalities as though personalities are where it's at, then we're missing the mark. And I think it's inexcusable at this stage.
Thank you, Alex. Definitely the questions of the oligarchy, the financier oligarchy, are matters that are not supposed to be spoken about in polite society. And I love the fact that you brought that in, the verboten. And that's extremely important because a lot of people don't think about the oligarchy as a real phenomenon that exists, that is shaping global considerations and policy, but it is. So why have a conversation without that factor of the City of London, of Wall Street, and the whole dynamic that brought these things into the character that they have now, and the ambitions and desires that they have now. So thank you, Joaquin Flores. I know you're in Europe right now. Joaquin is the editor, the curator of the New Resistance channel, the head of the director of the Center for Syncretic Studies, and somebody who's been my friend for some time. I'm curious to get Joaquin's take on things. Joaquin, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me? Am I coming through?
Perfectly loud and clear.
All right. So we're talking about kind of like this election. I guess we're talking about Trump and taking this all in. I have to say, I was a few minutes late and I apologize. And I was able to catch, I hope, most of what Garland Nixon was saying. And I'd like to kind of piggyback on some of those things as a person who spent decades as a community and labor organizer on the left, as a person from Los Angeles, a person of color, a person who organized an SEIU rank and file, who mobilized members for Obama in 2007, 2008. And looking from the inside deeply, what is actually going on inside the Democrat Party and what is actually at stake. And I think that Garland touched on a fundamentally important point, that we are seeing a transition, a change, very similar to what has happened, maybe 50 years ago, when the Democrat Party changed, and I think that it's very unuseful to engage in the rhetoric of 20th century categories about who's a fascist, and I'll even include like who's a communist. Although I would say that I very much agree generally, and in particular this evening with Tom's comments by and large as well. I would actually argue that that Kamala Harris, in the traditional understanding of fascism, more closely resembles that, more fits that bill. But I wouldn't say perfectly. And I don't think that's the important case to be made anyway. What is happening right now, talking about the change in the Republican Party and how Black and Latino voters have been embracing Trump, and what a significant change that this marks. And I think that it's so important. We can include in that, although this is a whole other category. This is, almost like the majority of people now in the United States who find themselves, who are members of, we can say, the working class. We can include organized labor, which represents, maybe 9 to 11% of the total working class, and unorganized labor. And I'd like to say that in all of these decades, the politics of trying to pressure the Democrat Party from the position of a ghetto, from being within, I'm talking about the labor ghetto, this has been disastrous. And the minute that you can make it competitive, whether you're labor, whether union or non-union, if you're a worker, if you're a person of color in the United States, in particular, our historically marginalized peoples, Black and Latinos, Native Americans, the tremendous support that we have seen from them for Donald Trump is not an endorsement of neocon politics as usual. It's not an endorsement either of Reaganomics. It's not an endorsement of the austerity and the neoliberal agenda that has permeated both Democrats and Republicans for decades. This is something fundamentally different and new. And I think that we have to approach it that way with integrity and honesty. And towards that, I would include that even if it turns out that the Democrat Party some years from now will be a better advocate or can be seen as being more legitimate, maybe once again in the eyes of Black, Latino, and labor working class voters. This is something that we have introduced a contest and we have introduced pressure like never before. And it's going to force seeing this flight of labor, Black, and Latino voters towards supporting this MAGA campaign as RFK Jr., who has a history of being pro-labor, as Tulsi Gabbard, who has a history of being pro-labor, anti-war. This is going to change everything, and it is so important to embrace that. And it's almost weird to hear, like these New York Times talking points, but I have tremendous respect for Peter and his work over the years, and he's someone that I'm proud to share a platform with. First of all, I disagree fundamentally with these characterizations, however, and they come straight from the New York Times talking point. I mean, every leak, every so-called insider, I don't even think that's remotely credible. And I would furthermore say that the pressure, we're talking about the failure of liberals, of progressives to put genuine and real pressure on the Democratic Party. Are we going to die before this happens? I mean, this is a fucking joke. This is something that has gone on for decades with no results. I think people have made careers. People are comfortable. They're ivory tower intellectuals. They're totally detached from the reality of working class men and women in this country today. And people are outraged. And they're not college students. They're not professors. They are people that cannot make ends meet. And they do not want to die in another imperialist war. And these imperialist wars continued. Every single president started one except for Trump. And it's totally like living in an upside down reality that no one can get on board with, to try to twist that into the opposite. As Tom said, to lay that at Trump's feet is incoherent, to be most respectful. It's incoherent. And I think that moving forward and with confidence more broadly, this change that we are living through is one that is definitively going to put pressure back on Democrats to say, we have failed to even pay lip service to the working class. We're seeing this where we have instead in the Democrat Party, they have attached themselves to various NGOs, to various causes that have been cost neutral for the ruling class to implement. DEI, woke, punching down. The entire agenda of thought police is something that is probably supporting their bottom line, number one, with the tremendous censorship. To see John Kerry and Hillary Clinton back to back just weeks ago launch an attack on the First Amendment. And this is something and it was like a conspiracy theory of Second Amendment advocates for decades. And it turned out to be true that after they assault the Second Amendment, after they move forward to disarm the public, why would they do that? To attack speech. And we already have this issue of the digital commons and the lack of democracy, the lack of a public angle, to see how big tech colluded with the corporatist powers that be in this ongoing process of corporate capture of the NGOs and the public sphere. There is very little of a pluralist set of institutions left. And we are lying to ourselves to say that Donald Trump is a threat to those. I'm sorry. Those have been destroyed, under fire, sabotage, barrage since I was born. And I was born in the 1970s. And it is ridiculous for me to hear people still talking about the agenda of a progressive left or a Democrat agenda of any kind in this day and age. It feels like I've woken up sometime in 1994 and everyone's still asleep. Excuse my French, but I think that it is so just disingenuous and out of touch to flip things like so upside down like this. And it's and forgive my French, and I don't mean to be out of form, but in the direction of a little more team spirit, let's say, I would say that Black, Latino, working class voters today are in the strongest position ever by being able to endorse Donald Trump. If Donald Trump delivers on none of those things, it is still net positive gain for the working class and Black and Latino voters as citizens, as workers, as people, as mothers, as fathers, as parents, as brothers, as sisters, as people trying to deal with this education system, the mandates, the attacks on speech, Common Core, mathematics. I mean, the corporate capture of these institutions is so far beyond the pale. It is so far beyond that. It is only people living in a simulation, a liberal, progressive 20th century simulation that continues on with a very small audience. Like, I don't even worry about what CNN says or NBC. I mean, their shows get 30, 40,000 views. This is somewhere on par with something that Matt Ehret does on a regular basis. And I think that this is, when people actually understand how few people are actually following the legacy corporate media, then they would understand, where we really are at. And where are we at? And this is something moving forward to November 5th. And the fight that is going to have to happen, there are already, we talk about fascism. What about the Transition Integrity Project? What if this was, this was like the stuff that was driven against Roosevelt, FDR. I mean, you had a cabal of generals, of corporate, of capitalists, of bankers, of the World Economic Forum, Nicholas Bergwijn and Tony Podesta, war game, how they were going to prevent, as they did, Donald Trump from winning that election. And in the event that he fought it, how they were going to secede, they were going to break off California, Oregon, Washington, possibly New York. And they were going to have Biden declare that was legitimate, that Newsom had declared an independent Republic of California, and that this region in the Pacific Northwest would be called Cascadia, and that this would break off. This was all written, and it's not a conspiracy. They published it in the Atlantic. They published it in, how we had a coup to save democracy. We have to save democracy from the voters, after all. This is where we are at. And to think about how, as Alex said, so we almost had a war, means we didn't. Do you understand that right now under Biden and Harris, we have a war with Iran? It just so happens that the U.S. is out of weapons because they blew them on Ukraine. And they told Israel, hey, we remember that from 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, when the United States had to give to Ukraine a whole swath of Israel's US-based stockpiles of 155 millimeter shells and so much more. Now Israel doesn't have those. Israel actually tried to attack Iran, but because Iran was prepared, look, there was a very good analysis done, and tell me where my clock is at.
Unfortunately, we're at the top of the clock, man. But
let me just say in 20 seconds then that at that moment in time with the Iran attack, we are now having a conflict with Iran, and it has nothing to do with the Biden-Harris administration, that Israel has called off, is retreating from Lebanon and has called off its attack, as Alistair Crook explained, in the 3 waves that didn't materialize. After the first wave, they nixed it. So this is the war that we're having, and that this Gaza didn't happen on Trump's watch. It happened on the lesser evil that we're being asked to endorse. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
I'd forgotten about that whole Podesta war game scenario with the breakaway California. I forgot all about that. Yeah, that's important. That's important consideration. Because that's part of the messaging is that if you vote for Trump, then you're going to be voting for a new civil war. But no, it's actually true. It was actually gained by the other side. Anyway, good point. Thank you for sharing a lot of those considerations. Before we go into a bit of a discussion, Marty Sieff jumped in and has asked. I'd love it. I'd love to get Marty's thoughts. So Marty's been again a longtime friend of Ed Lozansky and Peter Kuznick, and is a senior fellow for the American University in Moscow. He's written for Sputnik News. He's written for the Washington Times for years as a senior correspondent. He's been all over the world. So, Marty, are you there? Marty, if you are there, you might be on mute. That's one thing that happens on these Zooms. Oh, I see your lips moving, Marty. I see them, but I don't hear the words coming out of the lips. So you're still on mute. Bottom left-hand side of the Zoom screen is typically the unmute option. Bottom left usually. Yeah, it looks like a little microphone. Nope, it's not working out for you, Marty. Damn.
Oh, now, how's that? Can you hear me now? You should be able to hear me now, Matt.
Yeah, there you are. Go ahead.
Thank you. Got it. Okay. Well, I usually talk at excess length. No doubt I will again. But the previous speaker.
But we only have max 10 minutes, and then we have to open
exactly. Up. No, I was going to say the previous speakers, thankfully, have made it very easy for me. I simply, apart from anything else I say, I cannot agree more. I agree 100% with Joaquin, with Alex, with Tom, and with my old friend Garland. 100% with all of you. Masterly presentations. Thank you. Peter is a very dear and treasured friend. But Peter, you have Trump derangement syndrome. I don't disagree with anything you say about the man. But that's not the point. The point is the records. As Joaquin said, we have at least 40,000 innocent Gazan civilians dead. The real figure is by now must be at least 60,000. And there is no end in sight. We have 600,000 Ukrainians dead, at least. The real figure by now is quite probably 700,000. If this had happened under Trump, you would be storming the White House and calling for it to be burned down. You would be going berserk. Yet you did not say a word about Biden. You did not say a word about Kamala. We have an 81-year-old about to turn 82, I think, on November the 20th, utterly senile, incompetent old coot. He cannot even knit his tie properly. An eminent Canadian diplomat, who is a friend of mine, pointed out he always knitted his tie in a certain way. All of a sudden, his tie appears knotted in a different way. Someone else is knotting his. He cannot even knot his tie. It is being done for him. He is totally incompetent. So is the vice president. She is totally incoherent when she is away from a teleprompter. And this should be obvious to you, of all people, an eminent historian, a brilliant, fearless intellectual. Why not can you see what is in front of your own eyes? Terrible things may well happen under Trump, but they have already happened here. We have a very serious risk of nuclear war under Trump if he gets back in. But he was president for 4 years, and it did not happen. The Ukrainian people were not decimated on a genocidal scale when Trump was president for the first time during those 4 years. Right now, my friend Sam Hosseini, I think, puts it very well. Sam, a brilliant political analyst, defines our dilemma as two dueling fascisms. I think there's a great deal to be said for that. A great deal to be said for that. But the fascism we have now is infinitely worse. Peter, they don't bother sanctioning you. They have sanctioned me directly twice already under the Magnitsky Act. I think you too, Joaquin, it's happened to you as well. Exactly. I know it's happened to Matt as well. I've had the FBI come knocking on my door and talk to me very politely and very courteously, but the message was very clear. You are going to jail for 5 to 20 years or pay $1 million in fines if you are not in compliance with the Magnitsky Act. So of course I have been in compliance with the Magnitsky Act. I am still, for the record, for anyone who is listening in, I have always advocated following the law. But where is the law? Who is the law? We don't have any law anymore. Huey P. Long, governor of Louisiana and United States senator, said in 1935 before he was assassinated, and there was no conspiracy theory behind it either. It appears to have been his own incompetent bodyguard shooting him by accident. But he was a demagogue, he was a clown, he was also a brilliant man. He fought the Ku Klux Klan. He fought anti-black racism in the South in the 1930s. And what did he say? He said, he was asked, can fascism take over America, as Upton Sinclair had warned? And he replied, sure it can, only it will be called anti-fascism. And this has already happened, as Joaquin says. We are in it was the Republicans who created this with the Patriot Act of 2001, as Peter and I have discussed and agreed on many times, but it has gotten even worse under Biden. I was not sanctioned and silenced when Trump was president, or when Obama was president. I have been sanctioned twice while Biden is supposedly president. And I have no doubt it will continue and get worse if and when Kamala gets in or is put in. In 2016, Hillary Clinton laughed at the possibility that she could possibly lose a legitimate election and refused to answer the question, will you accept the result if you lose, because she didn't take it seriously. And she accused Trump of denying the result. In the event, she did not accept the result. She challenged the legitimacy of the election immediately. Today, you can be shut down, as Strategic Culture Foundation was in the United States, for daring to suggest that the 2020 election was not free and fair. Yet, ever since 2016, the deep state and the American media and the American Congress on both sides have put forward the total unfounded lie that the 2016 election was manipulated by the Russians to put Trump in. There is no evidence for this whatsoever. I have written on this. I've covered it at first hand. I can testify to this. None whatsoever. Now, Peter, like many intellectuals, my friend, I'm sorry, you used foul personal language to describe Trump, taking it from Tillerson. Well, big deal. I come off the streets of fucking Belfast, and I can use that language with much more legitimacy and power than you will ever dream of doing. We have a Democratic candidate for the presidency right now who got where she is because she opened her mouth and pleasured Willie Brown's prick, and you know this. You know this. It is what Al Gore, eminent Democrat, would have defined as, if he had the guts to do it, it's a great phrase, an inconvenient truth, an inconvenient fact. Every liberal Democrat and every old so-called fake and now obsolete progressive, as Joaquin says, turns their eyes away from this. There is not a word of the reality that we have a completely senile, repulsive little turd who was stupid at the best of times in the White House, who should never have been president, who has never truly been president, and she will be as bad, possibly worse, because she has health and surface credibility, and she may win. She may win legitimately, or the election may be delivered to her. And my great fear, as Alex and Joaquin rightly point out, is that whichever of them win, half the country may refuse to accept the legitimacy of the result either way, even if it is legitimate. And even if it is legitimate, or if it is alleged not to be legitimate, how will we be able to tell or prove it either way? This is a terrible, nightmarish situation to be in. But without doubt, the situation is very grave under Trump. But it is a certainty it is exactly the opposite of what you said, Peter. There is a very grave danger of complete collapse under Trump, very definitely. But there is a certainty of catastrophe, unavoidable catastrophe, if Kamala gets in. I wish I did not have to say it, but there you are. Am I within my 10 minutes? I think I am.
You hit the mark perfectly. No, thank you, Marty. Yeah, that was good. I'll give it over to Peter, who's received a lot of flack over the last few speakers. So I'll give you a chance to say a few words in response if you'd like, before we go to Alex, who has a thought as well to share, and then some people in the audience I know I have a question or two. I think Tom has a consideration as well. So yeah, Peter, do you want to toss anything out there?
Sure. I'll start with Marty, who's a dear friend. You say 40,000 or 60,000 dead in Gaza. I use the British Medical Journal figure of probably 200,000 dead.
I will go with that. Yes, certainly.
Because
Certainly.
the 40, 60,000 figure from the Gazan Health Ministry does not include all the people who are under the rubble who haven't been found, and
I agree.
plus all the people who have died from the starvation and the disease. Uh, and I agree with you about Biden's senility. I agree with you about the nightmare of the Biden presidency. I agree with you about Kamala's warmongering. Uh, I also get visited by the FBI and called before the Senate Intelligence Committee. Uh, so I do not have anything or very much positive to say about the Biden presidency or Kamala and her background. And I also agree with you about the attack on free speech in the United States. Two of the stations that I do regularly, RT and Sputnik, have recently been thrown off the air.
Yeah.
So, and I despise the neoliberalism and the neocon foreign policies, as probably all of you do. And I do more than 300 interviews a year attacking Biden foreign policy and the wars and the threats of war in over China and the situation in Ukraine and the responsibility that Biden has for that, as well as the situation in the Middle East. But I do disagree with a lot of things that were said, and I do find Trump to be so frightening. Maybe it's my background, the fact that all of my relatives, or most of my relatives, were killed in the Holocaust before I was born. So I have a special sensitivity against the threat of fascist taking power. And it wasn't Upton Sinclair, it was Sinclair Lewis who wrote It Can't Happen Here in the mid 30s. And I think it can happen here. But some of the specifics that I would take issue with, clearly, Tom is right that Obama did push Ukraine. However, Obama refused to give lethal weapons to the Ukrainians. That was Trump who provided the lethal weapons to Ukraine, not Obama. I don't give, in my books, I'm very critical of Obama, but I want to make that point for number one. Tulsi Gabbard. I love Tulsi. She told the New York Times that she was reading, watching all of Untold History, and she thought everybody had to do so. So I'm a big fan of hers. Not as big a fan of RFK Jr.'s, and I think in a lot of ways he's out, out to lunch also. Tom said the polls show that Trump is going to win. I don't know which polls he's referring to. The latest surveys show that they're very close, of course, but she's up in the blue wall states. The last state that they just show that she's up 3 points in Iowa. Now, I don't trust the polls, and I don't know that they're going to be accurate this time either, and they're very, very close. But to say that the polls are correct and Trump is going to win is not at all true. He said that Israel and Iran are already diffused. I think it was Joaquin who said that, talked about how dangerous that situation is. They're far from diffused. Trump is the biggest supporter of Netanyahu and goes both ways. Netanyahu's two goals are, number one, to get Trump reelected, and number two, to get the United States in a war with Iran. And if Trump's in there, I think that's very likely to happen. And when Trump said to Israel that they should attack Iran's nuclear facilities, if there's anything that was going to provoke a full Iranian response, it was going to be that. That was going to lead to a broader war. So to say that Trump wouldn't cause a broader war there, I think is really also wrong and irresponsible. Saying that Kamala is a communist, I wish she were a communist. I might support her and think more highly of her if she were. She's so far from being that to say that is deranged. To talk about autocracy versus democracy, what I often say is that to Biden, this is a battle between autocracy and democracy. But the London Economist got it right when they said to Biden, it's a battle between autocracy and democracy. To the rest of the world, it's a battle between autocracy and hypocrisy. And I think that's what we face at this point. The idea that Trump would negotiate a deal with China, maybe. We don't know. We do know that he's called for a massive increase in tariffs and that his policy toward Taiwan is really what reignited and inflamed the crisis when it didn't have to be a crisis over Taiwan and had been, relatively quiet before that point. Tom also said
on that particular point, I'll just jump in there. He did do a 250.
I would like to respond to some of these things. To be honest with you,
but not yet. But just to clarify on this point, he did do a $250 billion trade deal with China that got sabotaged when COVID was launched. But that was very much something that he did do. I'm just saying.
But if you look at his rhetoric,
rhetoric. But I'm saying he did that. They signed the $250 billion trade deal.
So one China policy was undermined by the Biden administration,
before
Pelosi, and all of that. Who cares about what happened before? That's a negotiating tool.
Oh, shut
Peter,
up.
I'm sorry, it's a negotiating tool.
Guys.
Of course, I've attacked Biden over Taiwan 100 times. I give talks about the militarization of the Pacific. And it's not just over Taiwan. You look at the doubling of defense spending by Japan. We look at AUKUS. We look at 4 new bases in the Philippines. I hate what Biden is doing about this, and I condemn it regularly. But when you say, Tom, that the nuclear threat is bullshit, that to me...
I didn't say that. I didn't say that. Peter, don't put words in my mouth. What I said was that as of right now, the Defense Department has made it abundantly clear that they and the Russians are doing the same thing. You can see it clearly that they're putting tripwire troops in both places so that if Israel attacks Iran, they kill Russians, and then it's on. And if Iran attacks Israel, they kill American troops, and it's on. And I think that's how you deal with the de-escalation of this situation, because someone else is trying to get us into a fucking war.
Well,
and if we don't actually look at the world from a geostrategic perspective, and we actually don't put pieces on the fucking game board, then none of the analysis means anything. I got a whole slew of these behind me. This is what I do on a regular basis, and it looks terrible. It looks terrible. Feels terrible. None of us want to live under the threat of this. But the reality is that geopolitics and negotiations it's all about the strategic. The strategic move, counter move. And we all have, and the person we should thank, all of us should thank for not actually having been blown up in a freaking nuclear fire is Putin. Because Putin is the one who's been consistently laying out who's pushing this, what the consequences are. And when we're seeing behind the scenes how the Americans, Alex and I did a podcast like 2 weeks ago. We talked about this. We used Syria as an example. So the Russians move into Syria in late 2015, blow open the whole bullshit story about ISIS not being able to be defeated. And the Russian and the American Air Force were both able to fly over Syria, carrying out parallel and separate missions and not ever get into any conflict with one another. Why? Because they talk to each other. So the idea that the defense departments are not actually trying to deconflict this shit and thing behind the scenes, while the politicians and the oligarchs, as Alex pointed out, are trying to push us into it. Because look, to Joaquin's point about California wanting to secede, it's a very important point, because I've been saying for 2 years now that the goal here is to break the American bond market. This is all about capital flow. It's all about the control of the collateral and about capital flow. And if Trump wins, the blue states want to secede, and if they select Harris and slip her skanky ass into the White House, then the red states are going to secede. And then I asked the question to everybody in the audience: who guarantees the U.S. debt under that circumstance? What happens to the flow of global capital? Where does the money go to? And I'm telling you that what they're desperately trying to do is get the money to flow back into Europe. And a lot of the money that actually has built this American empire was, as Martin Armstrong has pointed out 100 times, that money was put here during the 30s to build the American military-industrial complex, to fight Britain's war in World War II, to then take it all back. And they're literally threatening with pulling the quote-unquote plug on us. And that's what the Marshall Plan was, folks. It was them getting return on their investment after they lost the war, because they really did lose the war, which we won for them. And the Russians paid a 27 million man price for. And we can also have the conversation about why Hitler attacked. And why does nobody ever ask the question why Hitler attacked in both directions? Yeah. When he was created by the American and British banks, the Bush family and all of that. Why did Hitler go attack in both directions? It's a good question that nobody wants to answer. Nobody ever wants to really like when we look this whole thing over. We look at the flow of history, and we see how this is all been fucking lied to about all this shit. Yeah. And I don't apologize for my language anymore, especially when it's this important. Like and there's Martin, the Irishman, sitting over there. You know the old Irish proverb: if two Irishmen are fighting, it's because an Englishman showed up yesterday.
Exactly.
I mean, this is the world we live in. And if we do not literally engage with this at that level, and we just parse friggin' words, and I watch people do this all the time, and they parse words, and then they use those words as evidence. It's not evidence. It's just words, because words can be interpreted however you want. And that's not, it's the actual actions of what has occurred and what's happening. Is Taiwan, like Pelosi goes over there knowing full well what that meant, and all of them, and then it's all insane. And the California politics are so bound up with them betraying the country to the Chinese. Of course, Trump is going to walk in there and go, "Yeah, we're going to make China a problem. We're going to deal with China." Now, I'm not saying that he's going to be perfect in any of this. I'm not. I don't know what he's going to do. But I know that at a fundamental level, his goal is to do nothing that will fundamentally undermine any more of what America was, not is. That's what I know.
Thank you, Tom, for that.
Sorry.
Peter, I know had a few other thoughts he wanted to get out of his head. So, Peter, did you want to keep that flow going, or are you?
I would like to ask Tom or to challenge something. Tom said that Hitler was created by the U.S. and the British banks, which to me sounds like the kind of extreme, overblown kind of comment and interpretation analysis that I keep hearing. Now, does that mean that the American and the British banks didn't play a part in creating Hitler? Yes. They did, and
currency arbitrage and Churchill misvaluing the price of the pound after the war, and the Dawes bonds, and her German hyperinflation, and the Treaty of Versailles. Like, of course, all of those things are part of the process. I mean, the Germans still were paying off their World War I debt until 2011.
It's too simplistic to say that kind of thing. Now, were they involved? Do they deserve blame for their role? Did they want Hitler to go after the communists and the labor movement? Absolutely.
Who they created?
Hmm?
They created that. I mean, friggin' as far as I'm concerned, at this point, I firmly believe that the Richard Poe was correct, and that the Russian Revolution in 2017 was a British color revolution. Like, I'm at that point, and I'm willing to like let's talk about it from that perspective. I don't know if it's too simplistic or not, but it's certainly an angle on all of on this that we never talk about.
Well, we do talk about it, and the Russian Revolution in 1917 was not a creation of the British either. I mean, I
see Matt's eyebrows going up at that statement.
we're reducing things, I think, to simplistic interpretation.
You mean if somebody asks you, Peter, if you believe in conspiracies or conspiracy theories, would you be insulted, or would you say yes, I do? What would your answer be?
Well, I did a big project with Oliver Stone.
I noticed that. I like to
Oliver Stone, who's been more attacked for being a conspiracist than anybody else on the planet, just
but
about.
I'm just asking
And
you, like, do you believe that conspiracy theories exist?
I think
That's like naive
that
simplicity?
a lot of conspiracy theories are a sign of mental turpitude and laziness, and that it's an easy way to understand it, as if these
Thought
evil
so.
forces are manipulating the world, and not that there aren't people who are trying to do that, but I think all of these situations are more complicated. So yes, a conspiracy means that
I
two
would agree
people
with that.
get together and plan something. So
Mm.
was
Right,
it
but then but I'm sorry, but Peter, I agree with you that the things are far more complicated than that. But then to reduce everything to a personality, frankly, I have an unfair personality assessment of Donald Trump. I've changed my opinion on Donald Trump. I used to call him a bully and a narcissist and all this stuff. I mean, when I wrote for Strategic Culture before I was sanctioned under OFAC not to write for them anymore as well, after the FBI showed up in my fucking door in
Exactly.
before the Biden junta took over. Oh, by the way, and I have the OFAC letters it's in my other office. Like it, I get it. I'm not arguing with that, but to reduce that to Trump's personality flaws are going to get us involved in World War III. I'm sorry, it's fucking histrionic. It's not even true. The man doesn't. I don't know about you, but did you watch the 3-hour podcast with Joe Rogan? I didn't see that guy that everybody complains about. I didn't see that. What I see is a guy who's really, really good at trying to like. He's not even like half of the person that we thought he was. I mean, is he a little boorish? Yeah, he's from Queens. He's not from Manhattan. I'm from New York. Like the difference between Queens culture and Manhattan culture. Does he have inferiority complexes? Sure. But that's not small. But that's not small man syndrome either. The guy's a mob boss. Think of him like a mob boss, and he's dealing with other mob bosses. And when you're dealing with other mob bosses, well, at the end of the day, that's what you have to deal with, and that's the way he deals with the world. And it's actually not a bad framework to deal with because that's what he's dealing with. And if that makes you uncomfortable, well, okay, that makes you uncomfortable, but that doesn't become analysis. I'm sorry, it just doesn't. That's the way I see it.
I'm from Brooklyn, so I have a slightly different perspective. I still haven't gotten over the Dodgers leaving, but when I
had worked in the South Bronx, Peter, as NYPD, I know, like we're all New Yorkers, and we all know the cultural differences across all of it. Like I'm from an Italian family, half from Queens and half from Brooklyn. Trust me, there's a big cultural divide there too.
So I guess. Now, I'm not trying to reduce it all to personality, although Trump's personality to me is so offensive that I know that shapes my views on him. And I think anybody who's so ugly and misogynistic, and I mean, just deal with the misogyny,
Really?
or the consequences of it, the overthrowing Roe v. Wade, the appointing three extreme right wingers to the Supreme Court, and what they've done in overturning what's the consequences for women's health care, or the things he says and does from that, to me, represent a different level of ugliness and destructive policy. What he's done with the immigrants, with the spreading of these lies about Haitian immigrants eating people's pets, the kind of the effort to ramp up the divisiveness in society. Now, I agree with Marty that it is a real danger what's happening in the United States now. I don't, want to see this. I want to see something much more unifying. And she's much more unifying, at least in her rhetoric and hopefully in her policies. I don't know what her policies are. I don't. I mean, I know to some extent. I don't like what I've seen so far, but I know that I hate what I see so far when it comes to Trump.
And that's why we all get one vote.
Alex, I saw your hand up for a while, but you're on mute, Alex. You gotta unmute.
Thank you, Matt. I wanted to say two things. First one was about the oligarchies, because I'm just answering to a couple of comments that appeared in the chat. So I wanted to say, yes, of course, I see that Trump is surrounded by personalities like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, and I wouldn't trust any of them as far as I could throw them. But it's also true that through history, the drive to reform the system has almost invariably also come from the oligarchies and from the elites, because some of them at least recognize that the system is on the way to perdition and that it has to be reformed, otherwise it goes to total destruction. So in Rome we had the Catiline conspiracy, we had the Gracchi brothers, we had Julius Caesars. All of these were aristocrats that paid with their lives to try to reform the system. And, so Donald Trump is a billionaire and he's taken money from suspicious oligarchs in the system. Okay, but, they tried to kill him twice thus far, 2 assassination attempts from the fine folks in the DNC, right? And it's very clear that these people are so very vindictive that Trump is basically laying down his future and his family's future in this fight. Okay, second thing I wanted to address is the thing in Ukraine, because Martin rightly pointed out that Ukraine didn't erupt in a war on Trump's watch, and it's not a coincidence. One of the first calls from Biden administration, from President Biden, was to Volodymyr Zelensky. He called him on the 12th day of entering the White House. Zelensky was elected by an overwhelming majority of Ukrainians to make peace and to normalize relations with Russia. That was his mandate. His behavior changed almost as soon as Biden was in the White House. After their call, 12 days into Biden administration, the first thing that the Zelensky did was take off 3 opposition television stations off the air and outlaw the main opposition party, and then later even arrested Medvedchuk, who was his chief political rival, and at that point, by far the most popular political leader in Ukraine. And from that point on, Ukraine was on the path of escalation, which culminated in the war that we're in now. It didn't happen on Trump's watch. It happens on Biden's watch, and it came on the orders of Biden administration. So we had the Ukraine's national security advisor. His name was Daniluk. And he said in an interview after the 3 opposition TV stations were taken off the air and Medvedchuk's party was disbanded, he stated that these moves were calculated to be in sync with the American agenda. It came from Biden himself. So is Trump more dangerous? I think we see proof in the pudding. We had 4 years of Trump, and we had almost 4 years of Biden, and the track record couldn't be clearer. Over and out. Thank you.
Could I ask Alex a couple of things?
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Alex, you say that they tried to kill him twice. Who is the they? You said.
Oh, yes. So good. I'm glad you asked, because let's not pretend that just because we say they, that this is some imaginary conspiracy group that doesn't actually exist. I maintain, and I didn't invent this. George Soros said it. Kurt Walker, U.S. ambassador to NATO, they all put it in this frame. We're in a conflict between 2 systems of governance. They are the representatives of the system of governance that's fighting to remain relevant and to remain in power. It's the occult money-lending oligarchy, which is centered on the axis of the City of London and Wall Street. We have to ask ourselves, we don't know the names of they who killed John F. Kennedy. We don't know the names of they who killed Robert F. Kennedy, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, but the assassination is one of the main tools of policy of this occult oligarchy. So obviously, the they would be my first people on the list of suspects. And how would I get to them? Well, I would probably run an investigation to try to find out who killed Robert F. Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King. Obviously, we're not going to come to the same names. It's not always the same person, but it's the same centers of power. Absolutely. It goes back to Abraham Lincoln, William McKinley. The list of dead bodies is very, very long, not just in the United States. Everywhere. They tried to kill Charles de Gaulle many times. They tried to kill, we can go down the list. It's very long and it's everywhere. So if you ask me who they are, if the idea is to dismiss me because I can't point a name, they're never even investigated. They never even go after these. It's forgotten. We get fake investigations, we get fake testimonies, and we get a fog, and they ride off into the sunset scot-free, and their power didn't diminish by getting the president of the United States assassinated and then getting away with it with complete impunity. Their power increased. So today they are in a position to attempt to kill Donald Trump, and they did. Nobody tried to kill Kamala Harris. Nobody tried to kill Joe Biden. They tried to kill Donald Trump twice, and they sabotaged his presidency for 4 years nonstop. And they've tried to put him in prison through lawfare, and so on, and so on, and so on. And, at this point, I think it's quite legitimate to analyze the patterns of behavior and to trace the system of incentives. And I think that they are almost certainly the power centers in the City of London and on Wall Street.
Well, Alex, Matt asked me before if I believe in conspiracies, that there are conspiracies. And this is an example to me of the kind of shoddy thinking that's often manifest in talking about.
No, be specific. What's shoddy about it?
We don't have any evidence to support what you're saying. Yeah, are there people
well, look,
there?
Do you have?
Let me talk
Peter, sorry to interrupt, but do you have any evidence that walking blindfold on a 4-lane freeway is dangerous for one's health? Can you show me evidence for that? So do I dismiss you and accuse you of shoddy thinking?
I'm just saying, no, I'm not accusing you in general of shoddy thinking, but I think this is an example of being irresponsible. Because from the little bit I know about the two assassins, they don't fit this pattern. If we want to talk about the Kennedy assassination, I can lay out to you volumes of information about what their motive was, who was likely involved, what the Alan Dulles role was, and all the other people.
Decades later, only decades later. Sorry, only decades later. Can you?
Mark Lane was.
So the assassination attempts on Trump, right? The FBI cremated the body within like 2 or 3 days. We've been unable to get into his phone. Yet Zuckerberg most definitely would be able to hand the keys over on that, as they did with J6 accused. So it's just a little bizarre to say that, when you're talking about shoddy thinking or things like this, you've just said to everyone in this room, Peter, with all due respect, that you don't know what Kamala Harris's policies are, but she's the one to stop fascism. And let's not even get into how we can't when we talk about loose, vague, or shoddy thinking. You can't operationalize fascism in your academic persuasion without reference to who? Umberto Eco, to Peter Griffin, and all of their analysis of fascism is bourgeois liberal analysis that's top down, and it punches down. It detests populism. It detests the workers. It detests people uprising. And just because there are some liberals that like the color red, and there are some, except unless it's the leader of North Korea, an actual communist in power who actually defends the people of North Korea that you've just called little tin pot rocket man or whatever. And yet, but maybe you would think Kamala Harris should be a communist, but I guess she wouldn't be tin pot rocket man or whatever, right? So I don't even think you know what you think. I think you're just like, and I, with all due respect, just like Martin Sieff said, you've got Trump derangement syndrome, brother. You've got TDS. That's what you got. And you don't even know what Kamala Harris's policies are. You just said it that you don't. And look, you're not the only one. None of us do, because there's nowhere to find it. I think that's what we're referring to. And yet we're just supposed to trust and believe vaguely in some shoddy analysis of fascism, which we can't even operationalize in the 21st century. This is not the age of radio. This is not the age of one-way communication. This is not a semi-feudal, late to develop capitalist society, as was fascist Italy, as was Germany under the Junkers when it was disunited, as was Spain. And all of the places of belated capitalist development in Europe went through or Eastern Europe as well, went through a communist or fascist managerial revolution to catch up with England and Western Germany and France. So this was, and the Rhineland. So this is all how it boils down, Peter. Like, you can't just accuse people of having a shoddy analysis in one breath. I mean, to hear you to invoke and rest in peace and God bless them, your ancestors who were liquidated in the Holocaust as a reason why we should support for president, a person who as vice president, as part of the Biden administration, in your words, has murdered 200,000 Gazans, right, is to me, you haven't learned the lesson of the Holocaust, Peter, if you continue to support the genocide that you do. And you might say, well, when Kamala Harris gets elected, I'm going to be protesting against her. Well, Peter, I'm almost 50 years old, and the politics that you promote are the politics that have destroyed our lives, have destroyed my life, there are no opportunities in this country anymore. And that we're going to protest against it, that is the politics of defeat. That is the politics of posturing. You're going to sleep well at night and feel good, and your daughters or her friends or your wife or your colleagues within your liberal bourgeois academic microcosm totally blocked out from the rest of the world, Peter. You're totally out of touch. It's big tech data that drove Trump. Like, they knew what people think from Facebook. So you have to figure out, Peter, why you're so against what American people want. Why do you position yourself as an authority over what people have been saying? And you're not even listening. You're just parroting what Hillary Clinton said, what some obvious war hawk neocon insider from the Trump administration, some disgruntled former employee said. Like, this is not about his personality, right? This is not about fascism either, because he can't define it. This is obviously not about Kamala Harris's policies, because you don't know what they are. This only really leads to one conclusion: Trump derangement syndrome. That's all I've got to say.
One thing that Joaquin brought up, because I was going to bring it up, because I actually want to get away from all of this and say, Joaquin brought up the very important phrase, and it dovetails on what Alex has been talking about, but the two systems of governments. He brought up the phrase "the managerial revolution." James Burnham. We are ruled by bureaucrats. We are ruled by a system now where the capitalists don't control the means of production, and the communists fail to capture the means of production and deliver it to the workers. Okay, and Burnham's analysis of 1946 and the managerial revolution has come to pass today, and we're seeing that. And what we're witnessing is what happens is the immune system of that system kicking in to stop anybody who's trying to break that level, break that system that's in place. This is a system of governance that has almost nothing to do with isms and ideology. It has everything to do with a managerial class that is just responding to the external threat and responding to that threat with every erg of their being, because that's where they live, that's where they make their money. And we know that the oligarch class that exists above that system owes no allegiance to anyone. And so they set us all against each other, or, arguing amongst ourselves when the bureaucracy is the eternal thing. Like, I like to use pop culture references on a regular basis. Everyone go back and really, really, really watch the Image System and Terry Gilliam's seminal movie, Brazil, or go back and watch Dr. Strangelove. Go back and watch any of these films. And all of our artists of that generation were warning us about this, and they were seeing ahead. Philip K. Dick talked about it in all of his books. I've seen everywhere. Like my entire bookshelf is littered with this in my life, and it's so very obvious. And I finally read The Managerial Revolution on the recommendation of my partner in Gold Goats and Guns, Dexter White, and he was like, "Dude, we need to talk about this because I think this is what we're really dealing with here." And so all of the conflict within this live stream itself is downstream of that. And it's downstream of our unwillingness to accept that we're fighting. When Mike Benz talks about the IC blob, that's the managerial revolution writ large. It's right in front of us. And now we have to ask ourselves the question: are we just being gaslit by morons to fighting amongst ourselves over the pittance of what they over what they allow us to keep, while their managers operate their Gantt chart over at Evil Corp Central, which is the way I like to put it? Is that what we're actually fighting about? And Trump and what I can see out of Trump now, which is much different than what I saw out of Trump in 2016, and it's even different than what I saw out of Trump in 2020. What he's clearly trying to do now is put the people around him who understand this and want to change the way that system operates. And to one other small point, again, I'm trying to get away from all of the personal attacks and all the rest of it. And the other side of this is that, look, I know people, especially the people in the chat, are worried about Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and all the rest of them. And I share that worry. But here's the problem at the end of the day. These people have real, honest to God power. And if you want to fight dragons, unfortunately, you're going to have to make peace with the fact that you're going to have to get comfortable with the fact that the only way to fight that dragon at this moment in time, under this circumstance, is to employ another dragon. And I would rather have a dragon like Peter Thiel, if he's that person, and Elon Musk, who are indifferent to my existence, than to the current transnational predatory oligarchy that is absolutely and utterly fucking hostile to my existence, which every one of us has evidence, the sanctions, the OFAC letters, and everything else. We've all been hit by it. And that is, I think, what we should really be focusing on. That's where I really wanted this conversation to go originally, and not to debunk the possibility that Trump is a fascist. So it's not about that. This is about something much, much, much bigger. And at the end of the day, I don't see people like Musk and Thiel and the PayPal mafia and the rest of them. I don't see them as hostile to my existence. I see them at best indifferent to my existence, which I will take every day of the week and twice on Sunday, because that will at least get us through as a species through this crisis period into the next one, where we can try and solve some of these problems for the next cycle. And we can hand off this world to our posterity, who can make better decisions than we did. And that's where I see this at this point in time, philosophically. Okay. And all the rest of it is just, trigger points because of, our own damage, our own trauma, our own worry and our own anxiety. We really need to stop. I said at the beginning, November 5th isn't really the issue here. It's November 6th. That's the issue. What are they going to do after the vote on Tuesday?
That is extremely important, and I think that's a point that we've taken for granted. What we got in 2020 as a shitstorm is probably just a sample of the sort of chaos we could expect, and there are certain interests that would like to capitalize on that chaos. How to navigate through that is something that is very important to at least have in the mind. I find it very daunting a little bit to think about some of the scenarios that could involve kicking over the chessboard, that could involve putting into play certain things that we last saw in play in the 1860s, when the U.S. came very close to being torn apart from foreign-induced internal dissension from within. That involves Canada. Sorry for that, by the way. British Canadian intelligence operations provided a massive hub for the Confederacy to run the Albany raids and various other operations against the United States, including Toronto banks that were carrying out economic warfare. I see a lot of parallels to the dangers today. But at the same time, too, I do also see internationally adults in the room. I look at the Multipolar Alliance. I look at the types of quality of thinking and policymaking and strategy that's coming out of the growing BRICS Plus array of nations that are able to put out certain fires that have been lit by arsonists in a remarkably human way. And I'm hoping that there's sufficient access amongst certain people who might have benefited from globalization, maybe played a very dirty game, and recognize that they will not exist. It's not in their interest to have a thermonuclear war burn the world down into ashes, and that it's more in their interest to try to adapt to a more sane business strategy that we see coming out of the Belt and Road Initiative, from other things that are really forward-thinking, big projects that would benefit and make a lot of money for people too. So I'm hoping that factor within the decayed West is sufficiently active to make some policy maneuvers, whatever happens, that could mitigate the chaos. That's something I'm thinking about. And unfortunately, we're rounding out the top of the second hour. So I'm very happy that this conversation has happened. Obviously, the focus on solutions, on how do we avoid World War III and work with the BRICS and other things. This is something we've talked about in previous weeks. This week, obviously, it didn't come up as much because of obvious reasons. But it's important that we did flesh out some of these ideas today. And I do thank all of the speakers and all of the guests for taking the time today to participate in this. And we're going to continue this in 2 weeks' time once again with, the world's going to throw a lot at us in the next 2 weeks. And I'm sure that's going to feed into a lot of conversation that we'll have then. But again, thank you, everybody. And I wish we could keep it going, but unfortunately, we do have to cut it off at 1 o'clock. So I'll just end it there. So thank you, everybody. And till 2 weeks from now, take care.